Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in Kentucky's history. Before we start, please leave a comment telling us where you are and what time it is when you are listening to this. We want to know where and when these documented stories get to. Harlan County had an unusual stillness in the fall of 1907. Pine Mountain made the valleys below look very dark. Along the Cumberland River, there were a few hunting cabins scattered throughout the area. The Harlan County Historical Society has records that show that between September and December of that year, 7 men who went into these woods for the hunting season never came back home. Ledgers kept track of the official disappearances, but they have since turned yellow with age. County Clerk Thomas Whitfield wrote each entry in careful cursive. Each one listed the man's age, job, last known location, and a short note that said, "No remains recovered." Local newspapers, mostly the Harlan Daily Enterprise, reported these disappearances as separate events, probably because of bad weather or attacks by wild animals. The editorial from the 28th of October 1907 said that the wilderness claims its due each season. This showed how people in that time period were used to the dangers of the Appalachian wilderness. But a set of journals found in 1962 while an old homestead was being fixed up pointed to something much more disturbing that had happened in those woods. The renovation was part of a federal plan to make the Daniel Boone National Forest into a place for people to have fun. The property, which was about 23 miles southeast of Harlan proper, had been empty for decades. Samuel Ledbetter, the foreman of the work crew, said in an internal Forest Service memo dated the 17th of June 1962 that the journals were found under a loose floorboard in what used to be the main living area of a large log cabin. Tobias and Elijah Blackwood, brothers who owned about 300 acres of thick woods in the southeastern part of the county, wrote in the journals. The land deed, which was filed in 1876 and given to the brothers after their father's death in 1899, said that the property rose from the waters of Cumberland to the ridge of Pine Mountain, including Bear Creek Hollow and the eastern face of Stony Point. The journals, which were 3 leather-bound volumes with pages made of handmade paper, had entries every day from 1899 to late 1907. This is a story that was put together using these journals, county records, newspaper articles, and interviews with people who are related to people who lived in Harlan County at the time. The investigation was never officially finished, and in 1967 the case was put away for good in the Kentucky State Historical Society, where it is mostly forgotten. People in McCreary County, the county next door, knew the Blackwood brothers as secretive trappers who sometimes traded animal skins in the small town of Whitley City. The town, which was founded in 1868 as a logging outpost, was made up of a general store, a small church, and a group of wooden houses along a single muddy street. Trading post ledgers from 1903 to 1906, carefully kept by owner Harold Jenkins, show that the brothers came by about once every 3 months to trade furs for goods. In 1948, Jenkins's granddaughter gave his record books to the McCreary County Historical Society. They show the things the brothers usually bought: salt, coffee beans, ammo, tools, and very rarely, tobacco for Elijah. The ledgers show that the brothers didn't talk much and did their business quickly before going back to their property. An entry from the 12th of March 1905 says, "Blackwoods came at dawn. They traded 7 fox pelts, 3 beaver pelts, and 1 bear skin of very high quality. They got their usual supplies plus 1 steel trap and a whetstone. They left before other customers came. They paid the rest of the bill, which was $1.37 in silver coins from 1878 and 1881. Harold Jenkins, the owner of the trading post, wrote in his personal diary that the brothers were very quiet and that other customers would clear space for them when they came in. An entry from November 1904 says, "The elder Blackwood, Tobias, stands near 6.5 feet tall with shoulders like an ox. His hands bear the scars of countless seasons in the wilderness, yet he counts coins with the delicacy of a banker. His brother, smaller but no less imposing, watches the door as if expecting trouble that never arrives. They move through my establishment like wolves among sheep." and I find myself checking my inventory more carefully after their departures, though nothing has ever been missing. Jenkins also noticed that the brothers looked very well fed for men who lived so deep in the wilderness, especially in the winter when game was scarce. Other mountain dwellers usually lost weight during the harsh Kentucky winters, but these people were very strong. When asked how they were able to hunt so well, Tobias, the older brother, would only say that they had ways of making sure the table was always full. This mysterious answer comes up several times in Jenkins's diary entries over 4 years, showing that the merchant was always interested in how they were able to do so well. The brothers' cabin was in a remote clearing about 17 miles from the nearest neighbor. The only way to get there was by a narrow dirt path that wound through thick pine trees. James Harkins, a logger whose father brought supplies to the Blackwood property in 1901, remembers that the path to the cabin was marked by strange arrangements of stones that were placed at odd intervals along the way. When local historian Margaret Wilson interviewed Harkins in 1964, he remembered his father saying that the stones stood like silent sentries and seemed to follow you with invisible eyes. The path itself was described as unusually level and well kept for such a remote area. It was wide enough for a horse but not a wagon, so visitors had to walk in single file. The Kentucky Land Office paid for a survey map in 1899 that showed the location, but maps made after 1910 don't show the property or its buildings. It's as if the land itself wanted to forget. The 1910 Geological Survey, which was done as part of a coal exploration project, shows only uninhabited wilderness where the Blackwood property should have been. This is strange because the cabin was built so well that it should have lasted long after that date. People who had seen the cabin said it was bigger than most cabins in the woods. The building was made of hand-hewn oak logs that were notched and fitted together with amazing accuracy. It had a stone foundation that went about 10 feet into the ground, making what witnesses called a full underground level that could be reached through a trapdoor in the main room. In 1908, during the late investigation into the disappearances, Luther Collins, a hunting guide, who said he had been to the cabin once in 1906, gave a statement to the Harlan County Sheriff. His description, which is still in the case files, says that the main floor had a big central room with a huge stone fireplace, 2 smaller rooms that were probably used as bedrooms, and a separate kitchen area with a strange brick oven built into the wall. Collins said that what stood out to him the most was the brothers' knife collection, which was on a wooden rack near the kitchen door. Must have been 30 or 40 different blades, he said. Some I knew were hunting or skinning knives, but others looked like surgical tools. They were all kept clean and organized by size. Elijah saw me looking and said they were family heirlooms from their father's time as a field medic during the war. Before the 1907 hunting season, the Blackwood brothers had mostly gone unnoticed by the police. A lawyer in Whitley City named Mr. Jonathan Pierce paid their property taxes every year. His short notes say that the brothers got the land from their father, who got it during the land redistribution after the Civil War. Pierce's legal ledger, which was found in a filing cabinet given to the County Historical Society in 1951, didn't have much information about his strange clients. His notes show that he only met the brothers twice, once after their father's death to carry out the will, and again in 1902 to write a document that said that if either brother died, the property would go to the survivor without any claims from anyone else. Pierce thought it was strange that neither brother had any other family or heirs, but he did what they asked without question. According to records at the courthouse, the older Blackwood had been a Union soldier and got the package as payment for his service. Researchers who looked at military records in 1965 found that he was Sergeant Ezekiel Blackwood, who had previously served in Company C of the 13th Kentucky Volunteer Infantry. His service record showed that he worked as a field hospital assistant in the last years of the war, and that he was especially good at amputation procedures. Pierce's notes, which were also found in the same filing cabinet, said that the brothers' father had strange dietary needs that made them live alone. In a letter to a co-worker from 1904, Pierce went into more detail, saying, "The elder Blackwood had a digestive problem that he got while serving in the military. His son said he could only eat very fresh meat cooked in certain ways, or he would be in terrible pain. This condition seems to have influenced his choice of such an isolated homestead, where game was plentiful and neighbors were few. There was no more information given, and medical records from that time weren't detailed enough to show what condition might have needed such strict dietary rules. The brothers never went to school, other than what their father taught them, and neither of them had ever been married. They were almost completely cut off from the outside world, except for their quarterly trading trips. People in the area around Pine Mountain where the Blackwoods lived were told to stay away from it, but no specific reason was given other than the usual warnings about respecting private property. In a 1966 interview, Eliza Jenkins, the daughter of the trading post owner, said that her father used to say, "Those who wander onto Blackwood land tend not to wander back off it." It's still not clear what caused the events of 1907. Some people think that the unusually cold September drove game animals deeper into the mountains, which made hunters go farther into the Blackwoods territory than they had in the past. The Louisville Meteorological Station's weather records show that September 1907 had temperatures that were 12 degrees below normal on average. On September 10th, there was an early frost that hurt crops all over the area. Some people point to a county law passed that summer that lifted restrictions on private property for licensed hunters during hunting season. This was done to stop rich landowners from taking over the best hunting grounds. The county records show that the law said licensed hunters could go after game on other people's land from September 1st to December 31st, as long as they didn't hurt buildings or animals. The Blackwoods are said to have shown up at a county meeting to speak out against this law, which is one of the few times they have been seen in town, but their objections were ignored. The minutes of the meeting only say that residents of Pine Mountain District raised an objection without naming the brothers. No matter what the reason was, it brought people who didn't know the brothers into their territory, and something changed in the Blackwoods. On the 17th of September 1907, the first person went missing. William Thornton, a 43-year-old bank clerk from Lexington, had gone to Harlan County with 3 friends for their yearly hunting trip, which they had been doing for 5 years. They set up camp about 7 miles from the Blackwood property, near the Cumberland River. Edward Rollins, one of Thornton's friends, told the Harlan County Sheriff that William had told them he was going to check traps along the eastern ridge of Pine Mountain. He was in a good mood that morning. Rollins said, "He had shot a big buck the day before. He said he wanted to set traps instead of going hunting because he thought the cold weather had driven smaller animals up to higher elevations." Thornton left camp around 8:30 inches the morning with his Winchester rifle, a skinning knife, and a small pack with food and water. His friends were worried when he didn't come back by sundown. The sheriff's report from the 20th of September 1907 says that Thornton's 3 friends didn't look for him until nightfall. They found his rifle leaning against a tree about 4 miles from their camp, along with a canteen that was only half full and a handkerchief that was covered in blood. The report says that the rifle appeared to have been placed deliberately rather than dropped, which means that Mr. Thornton put it down on purpose. There was no other sign of the man. The sheriff's report says that a storm came in that night and washed away any possible tracks. For 3 days, a search party made up of the sheriff, 2 deputies, and a few local volunteers combed the area but found no more evidence. Sheriff Harlan Daniels called off the search on September 23rd, saying that Thornton probably had an accident in the rough terrain and either died from his injuries or was taken away by scavengers. The last line of the report says, "Mr. Thornton's disappearance, while tragic, is consistent with the dangers inherent to hunting in remote areas. His friends went back to Lexington, where Thornton's wife later had a headstone made for him in the Lexington Cemetery, but no body was ever found to put under it." On October 23rd, a month later, 2 brothers from Cincinnati, James and Robert Caldwell, did not come back to their hotel in Cumberland. The men, who were 28 and 31 years old, were experienced hunters who had come to Kentucky just to hunt white-tailed deer, which were plentiful in the area. They got there on October 20 and stayed at a boarding house run by Mrs. Edith Simmons, a widow who took care of hunters from other states. The men had told their landlady that they were going to hunt deer in the southern part of Harlan County, close to the border with Tennessee. Mrs. Simmons told Sheriff Daniels on October 25 that the brothers had talked about finding promising signs near a creek that flows into the Cumberland. up where the mountains get steep. This description fits with the general area of the Blackwood property, but Mrs. Simmons didn't know the area well enough to make that connection. 2 days after the Caldwell brothers left, their horses came back to the stable without riders. Joseph Miller, the stable hand, said that the horses looked upset but not hurt, and they were still saddled. Mrs. Simmons said in her statement that the saddlebags had a lot of meat wrapped in oilcloth, which she thought was venison. She didn't think it was important at the time, and thought the brothers might have gone to get more game, so she cooked the meat for her boarders. Before the brothers were officially reported missing, boarders ate the meat. When investigators asked her about the meat's taste or look, she said nothing was wrong with it, only that it was tender, as if from a young animal. She remembered that Mr. Douglas from Virginia, a boarder, had said it was the sweetest venison he'd ever tasted, and had asked where the brothers had been hunting so he could try his luck in the same area. Mrs. Simmons couldn't remember if she had told him this. When the Caldwell brothers went missing, Sheriff Daniels put together another search party. This time, they focused on the area south of Cumberland, where the brothers had said they would be hunting. The search lasted 5 days, but all they found was one spent rifle cartridge that couldn't be linked to either brother's gun. On the 2nd of November 1907, the Cincinnati Enquirer published a short article about the missing men. It said that they were thought to have died in the dangerous Kentucky wilderness. In the middle of November, their parents went to Harlan County, but came back to Ohio without any answers. Robert Caldwell's wife was pregnant with their first child, who would be born in February 1908 and never know his father. In a letter from Mrs. Rebecca Caldwell to Sheriff Daniels dated March 1908 and kept in the case file, she asks for any more information about what happened to her husband. There are no records of the sheriff's response, if one was sent. The third person to go missing was Frederick Schmidt, a German immigrant who lived in Louisville and worked as a butcher. He was alone when he went missing in early November. On November 3rd, Schmidt, who was 39 years old, went to Harlan County by himself. The guest register at the Railroad Hotel in Harlantown shows that he checked out on November 5th and told the clerk he was going hunting for a few days before coming back. Schmidt never returned to the hotel, and no one noticed he was missing until November 15, when he didn't show up for work in Louisville. His boss called the police because he was worried about the absence of his dependable worker. It had been almost 2 weeks since Schmidt was last seen when Sheriff Daniels was told. A quick search was done, but the weather had turned cold, so a full investigation couldn't be done. Schmidt's hunting gear, which included a unique German-made rifle with his name on the stock, was never found. The fourth and fifth disappearances happened at the same time and involved 2 local men, Thomas Howard and Peter Jenkins, who were brothers-in-law. They left their homes in Cumberland on November 26th for what was supposed to be a 2-day hunting trip. Howard worked as a coal miner and Jenkins as a carpenter. They both lived in Harlan County their whole lives and knew the area well. The wives of the men, who were sisters, said that the men had talked about hunting in the high country because there weren't as many animals to hunt in their usual spots closer to town. Their family members told Sheriff Daniels right away that they were missing when they didn't come back on November 28th. A search party was quickly put together, mostly made up of other miners and neighbors who knew the men well. Even though the search party knew the area well, they couldn't find any signs of Howard or Jenkins beyond their first campsite, which looked like it had been left quickly. They had put out the campfire, but they had left their cooking gear behind, along with a rabbit carcass that was only partially dressed and was going bad. The men's rifles were gone, which means they had them when they left camp. The sixth person to go missing was Reverend Isaiah Thornfield, a traveling preacher from Tennessee who had been holding revival meetings in small towns all over Harlan County. He went missing on December 12th. Timothy Greer, Reverend Thornfield's assistant, said that the Reverend had shown interest in delivering his message to the more remote homesteads in the area. Greer told the authorities in his report that the Reverend believed no soul was too remote to receive the word. People had told him about families living in the mountains who hadn't seen a preacher in years, and he felt called to help them. Thornfield left on horseback on December 12 with his Bible and a small bag of food. 3 days later, his horse came back to the church in Harlan without him. The Reverend's Bible was in the saddlebags, but it looked like it hadn't been touched. His other things were gone. Greer got church members together to search, but like the last time, it didn't work. The last disappearance of the season, and maybe the most disturbing in hindsight, happened on December 23rd. Mary Caldwell, the sister of the missing Caldwell brothers, had come all the way from Cincinnati to Harlan County to find out what had happened to her brothers. Even though she was told how dangerous the winter weather was, she hired a local guide named Jeremiah Stone to take her to the place where her brothers were going to hunt. Stone later told the police that they left on the morning of December 23rd, following the general path that Mrs. Simmons said the Caldwell brothers had taken. Stone said that as they got closer to the foothills of Pine Mountain, Mary Caldwell insisted on going ahead by herself for a short distance to a ridge where she thought she could see the land better. Stone said he told her not to do it, but he gave in to her demand and agreed to wait with the horses. He got worried after about 30 minutes and followed her path, but he couldn't find any sign of her. As night fell, he went back to Cumberland to get help. On Christmas Eve, a search party got together, but a bad snowstorm made it harder for them to find what they were looking for. By the time the weather was good enough for a full search, several feet of snow had covered up any tracks or other evidence. There was no sign of Mary Caldwell. The fact that 7 people went missing in one hunting season was an unusual pattern that should have led to a more thorough investigation. But there were a number of reasons why there wasn't a coordinated response. The victims were from different places. Many were visitors from other states who didn't know anyone in the area, and the disappearances happened over a period of several months. According to county records, Sheriff Daniels was also dealing with labor problems at a number of coal mines during this time, which took up a lot of his department's resources. Also, the terrain was hard to search because it was so far away and dangerous, especially as winter set in. On the 8th of January 1908, the Harlan Daily Enterprise published an editorial about the strange number of people who had gone missing. It said that the harsh winter weather and the arrival of inexperienced hunters who didn't know how to navigate the dangerous mountain terrain were to blame. The editorial ended with a call for stricter rules on hunting licenses for people from other states, but it didn't say anything about foul play. Years went by, and people forgot about what happened in 1907. The Blackwood property stayed the same until 1932. When the county took it back because the brothers hadn't paid their taxes. They hadn't been seen at the trading post since December 1907, when they were thought to have died. The last time anyone saw either brother was on the 26th of December, 1907, when Elijah Blackwood took an unusual trip to the trading post in Whitley City during the winter. Harold Jenkins wrote in his diary on that day that Elijah looked haggard and distracted, with stained clothes and a more agitated demeanor than Jenkins had ever seen before. Jenkins also wrote that Elijah traded an unusually large amount of meat and pelts for supplies that suggested long-term travel, such as preserved foods, ammunition, a new knife, and a heavy coat. When Jenkins asked about Tobias, Elijah is said to have said, "My brother is at home taking care of personal matters." Jenkins noted that Elijah left going west instead of north toward the Blackwood property, and that was the last time either brother was seen. The land was added to what would later become the Daniel Boone National Forest. The deed transfer, which was filed in the Harlan County Courthouse on the 15th of April 1932, says the land is abandoned and without structures of value. This means that the cabin had either been destroyed or fallen apart a lot since then. In 1962, the Forest Service planned to build a fire observation tower on the highest point of the old Blackwood land, and that was when people started to show interest in the remote parcel. While digging for the tower's foundation, workers found the remains of a cabin that had burned down decades before. Project Supervisor Samuel Ledbetter's site report says that the foundation goes about 10 feet below ground level and that there are signs of several underground rooms or chambers, which is unusual for structures of this region and era. They found a metal box with 3 leather-bound journals inside, which were partially damaged by fire but still readable. The Forest Service headquarters in Winchester, Kentucky was told about the find. Officials there decided that the materials were old enough that they were more important for history than for crime. The journals were first kept at the Forest Service's regional office in Winchester, but in 1964 they were moved to the State Historical Archives in Frankfort. As part of a research project on Appalachian isolation communities, Dr. Eliza Montgomery, an anthropologist from the University of Kentucky, looked at the journals. Her initial report, dated the 3rd of October 1964, characterizes the journals as a remarkable window into the psychology of extreme isolation and the development of parallel moral systems in remote communities. Montgomery observed that the journals featured daily entries, written in two distinct handwritings, presumed to be those of Tobias and Elijah Blackwood. From 1899 to early 1907, the entries were mostly about everyday things that people needed to do to survive in the wild, like hunting reports, weather observations, and taking care of their property. Montgomery said that the entries were surprisingly articulate for men with presumably limited formal education. But starting in March 1907, the tone of the entries, especially those attributed to Tobias, started to change. Montgomery's notes show that Tobias wrote more and more often about people invading their land and breaking the rules. An entry from the 23rd of March 1907 says, "Found boot prints along the eastern creek bed, strangers walking on our land without permission or acknowledgement." Father would not have tolerated such trespass. Later entries showed Tobias's growing paranoia about outsiders, with language that became more hostile. In August, he wrote about putting up more deterrents along the property lines, but he didn't say what they would be. During this time, Elijah wrote about how worried he was about how his brother was acting. He wrote on August 17, T.E. rarely sleeps, spends nights walking the perimeter, and talks a lot about Father's lessons and our duty to the land. I'm worried that being alone is starting to get to him, but he won't even think about our usual trading trip this month.
But the recipes were the most disturbing entries. Dr. Montgomery's analysis, which was sent to the Journal of Appalachian Studies but never published, said that the journals had detailed instructions for cooking different cuts of meat from what the brothers called two-legged game. The entries became more frequent and detailed starting in September 1907, with Tobias Blackwood writing on September 18th. Unexpected bounty yesterday. Trespasser carried identification from a Lexington banking establishment. Elijah processed the meat while I disposed of the remainder, as Father taught us. The liver was exceptionally tender when prepared with wild onions and salt. We will preserve the rest using the smoking technique Father preferred for the leaner portions. Montgomery's report says that later entries gave specific instructions for how to cook different cuts, with Tobias showing particular enthusiasm for certain preparations. His entry from October 25th says, "The older one provided better marbling in the flank portions." Elijah doesn't like how I say it, but Father always made it clear that using the right words is important for proper preparation. We are not savages. We are custodians of an ancient knowledge. During this time, Elijah's entries became more and more upset. On November 3rd, he wrote, T.E. is only protecting what is ours, as Father would have wanted. But Father's hunger was born of necessity during war times. Not this eagerness T.E. now shows. He talks about setting lures instead of just defending our boundaries. I can't sleep, even though the meat keeps us warm on these cold nights. By December, the brothers seemed to be fighting. Elijah wrote on December 14, I confronted T.E. about the preacher. There was no threat there. The man just wanted to bring his God to our door. T said, all trespassers are the same. That intention matters not when the result is violation of our sanctuary. He becomes more like Father with each passing day, but Father at least maintained control of his appetites. Montgomery's research was suddenly stopped in November 1964, and her paper was taken off the market. Records from the university show that she asked for a sabbatical not long after that and moved to Oregon. She never went back to the study. The journals were put in storage with limited access after a review by the State Attorney General's office in early 1965. A short note attached to the case file says that there is no evidence that can be used to take action against incidents that happened more than 50 years ago, especially since no identifiable remains have been found. The case was officially put in the past and given the label historical interest. After Montgomery stopped his research, a folklore collector named Martin Ridley traveled through Harlan County, recording people's stories. In 1966, he talked to Abigail Jenkins, the 7-year-old daughter of the trading post owner who had known the Blackwood brothers. The Library of Congress has a copy of the interview transcript in its American Folklore collection. It has a scary story. "My father didn't talk about the Blackwoods very much," Jenkins told Ridley. "But there were things he told me near the end of his life that he'd kept secret for decades." Jenkins said that her father had told her that Elijah Blackwood had come to the trading post alone in December 1907 and acted more strangely than usual. "Father said that Elijah's hands shook so badly that he could hardly count his coins," Jenkins remembered. "His clothes were stained dark in places, and he smelled like smoke, and something Father said was like a slaughterhouse. He traded an unprecedented amount of meat, which he claimed was venison and wild boar, though Jenkins's father noted it was packaged differently than their usual offerings." Jenkins went on. "Father said Elijah kept looking over his shoulder as if he thought someone was going to follow him into the store. When Father asked about Tobias, Elijah got upset and said something that Father found so disturbing that he could remember it word for word. Tobias has developed a taste that can't be satisfied with animal flesh alone. I fear he's changing into something Father always warned about." Elijah reportedly paid for his supplies with several gold coins instead of the silver they usually used. Elijah told Jenkins's father that they had found the coins in the pockets of someone who had broken into their house. Elijah supposedly told Jenkins's father before leaving, "If Tobias comes looking, you never saw me. For your own safety, remember that." After that visit, Elijah never came back to the trading post. Jenkins also said that in the spring after the hunters went missing, some of their things were found for sale in Knoxville. A pocket watch that looked like one that William Thornton owned was said to have shown up in a pawn shop. A fellow Cincinnati hunter also recognized a unique hunting knife that belonged to one of the Caldwell brothers in a Knoxville general store. However, there was never any link to the Blackwoods, and officials thought that these items showing up was just a coincidence, possibly because thieves had stolen the missing hunter's gear and left it behind. At the end of the interview, Jenkins reveals a disturbing detail that was left out of official reports. Her father had tried the meat that Elijah brought on that last visit and got very sick afterward. Father said he'd never been so sick, Jenkins told Ridley. He said it was like his body was rejecting something that was fundamentally wrong. He couldn't keep food down for almost a week after that. Years later, on his deathbed, he told her he thought he had eaten human flesh without knowing it. He said to me, "Abigail, I've carried this knowledge like a stone in my gut for years." That wasn't any deer or boar Elijah brought in that day. I have been a hunter all my life and know the taste of every animal these mountains produce. What I tasted that day was something else entirely, and may God forgive me for it. When Ridley asked if Jenkins's father had ever told the police about his suspicions, she said he hadn't. Who would believe that? And by the time he was sure, years had gone by and the Blackwoods were long gone. Most of the physical evidence of what happened in those woods in 1907 is gone. The fire that burned down the Blackwood cabin looks like it was set on purpose, but no one knows who did it. In 1962, as part of the tower construction project, forensic analysis of the site showed that the fire had burned at an unusually high temperature, which is what happens when accelerants are used. The project report says that evidence points to more than one place where the fire started, which doesn't fit with accidental causes like lightning strikes or chimney fires. At the time, this finding was not followed up on because the site was too old to be of interest to criminals. In 1967, before the fire tower was finished, workers found a series of stone-lined pits about half a mile from the cabin site. The Forest Service says these are possible root cellars or storage facilities that are about 6 feet deep and 8 feet wide, with fitted stones lining the walls and heavy wooden lids that have partially fallen off over time. When bone pieces were found among the stones, work stopped. The Forest Service asked Dr. S. Walter Richardson, a forensic anthropologist, to look at the pieces briefly. He decided they were not human, but probably deer or wild boar. He noted that the cutting marks visible on some specimens are consistent with butchering practices common in the region. His report, dated June 8, 1967, said that construction should continue and the pits were filled in and covered. There are no public records of pictures of these digs, but an internal Forest Service memo asked that all materials related to the find be sent to the regional office. Dr. Richardson's original field notes, which journalist Thomas Carter got through a Freedom of Information Act request in 1978, include an observation that was left out of the official report. Several of the larger bone fragments exhibit unusual cutting patterns inconsistent with standard game butchery. The precision of certain cuts suggests knowledge of anatomy beyond that typically possessed by hunters or trappers. Without more complete specimens, conclusive identification is impossible, but the possibility of human remains can't be entirely ruled out. The fire tower was only in use for 7 years before it was shut down because of what official reports called persistent structural issues and unexplained equipment failures. Rangers who worked at the tower often asked, "Be moved," because they heard strange noises and smelled cooking meat all the time, even though it was in a remote area. In August 1970, Ranger David Coleman wrote a long report about an unnerving experience he had while working the night shift. Coleman wrote, "Around 2:15 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like a lot of people moving around the base of the tower. When I yelled and shined my flashlight, I couldn't see anyone. But the noises went on for almost 20 minutes. The next morning I saw a lot of footprints in the soft ground around the tower, going all the way around it, but no tracks leading to or from the area." Coleman asked to be moved the next day. They filed his report, but they didn't look into it. In 1974, the tower was taken down and the area was set aside as a wildlife conservation zone where the public could not go.
The most convincing proof that something terrible happened on the Blackwood property comes from a source that isn't official. A private collector of Civil War memorabilia bought a trunk of papers at an estate sale in Knoxville in 1968. There was a letter from Elijah Blackwood to a cousin in Tennessee dated the 3rd of January 1908 among these papers. Herbert Simmons, the collector, knew the name from local stories and showed the letter to Dr. Montgomery, who had gone back to teaching at the University of Kentucky but had stopped working on the Blackwood case. Montgomery verified the letter by comparing the handwriting to journal entries that are known to have been written by Elijah. This made it likely that the letter was real. The letter, which is written on paper that has been stained with water and fading ink, is a kind of confession. "Dearest cousin," the letter begins, "Though we have never met, I write to you as my last remaining blood relation, according to father's records. What I must confess may never reach your eyes, as I doubt my resolve to actually post this letter. Yet, I must set down the truth somewhere before I depart this world or lose my mind entirely." Elijah wrote that his father had taught them that human flesh contained special properties that would grant strength and longevity if consumed regularly. He said that their father, Ezekiel Blackwood, had survived the harsh winter of 1865 while serving with the Union Army by eating the flesh of dead soldiers. He then passed on his addiction to his sons through both instruction and practice. The letter goes on to say, "Father taught us that some men, especially those who lived clean lives and stayed away from alcohol, provided meat that could keep not only the body but also the spirit. He called it the ultimate sustenance and thought it had extended his life beyond natural limits. He taught us how to find the right animals, prepare the meat in ways that kept what he called its essence, and get rid of the rest of the evidence in ways that nature would hide." Elijah said that after their father's death in 1899, he and Tobias had stopped doing it and were living off of regular game. But in the winter of 1901, when a lost trapper came to their cabin for shelter, Tobias went back to his father's ways. Elijah wrote, "He said it was self-defense because the man was sick with fever and threatened us with his knife. But I saw the look in my brother's eyes as he prepared the meat, the same hunger that had possessed father in his final years." The letter says that the brothers came to an uneasy agreement that they would only eat people who trespassed on their land and posed a threat. This arrangement lasted until the 1907 hunting season, when the county law brought more hunters into their area. Elijah said that Tobias's hunger had grown so strong that he started hunting people on purpose instead of just eating people who came into his territory. The letter says he started to set traps not for animals, but for men. He studied their movements, found their camps, and chose targets with the same care that Father taught us to choose prime deer. What had once been a reluctant need became an eager pursuit. The letter says that on Christmas Eve, 1907, Elijah found Tobias making a stew with pieces of a young woman who had been looking for her missing hunter husband. When I saw women's clothes among the things that had been thrown away, something broke inside me, Elijah wrote. Father had made it clear that women were never to be considered suitable. Something fundamental had changed in Tobias. He was consuming not for sustenance, but for pleasure. The expression on his face as he stirred that pot haunts me still. According to the letter, this crossed some moral line for Elijah, who claimed to have killed his brother that night and burned their cabin with Tobias inside. I hit him with Father's old army, shovel from behind. As he bent over the hearth, I told myself it was mercy, not murder, that the brother I had known was already gone, replaced by something that just wore his face. I poured coal oil over everything that would burn, and lit the flame that I hoped would purify what we had become. Maybe it was cowardice that I didn't join him in that. The letter ends with Elijah saying that he was going west to escape the hunger that never truly leaves. His last words were, "I still feel it, cousin. The craving Father planted in us. In my dreams I taste it still and wake up hungry for something deer and rabbit cannot satisfy. I go west to lose myself where no one knows the name Blackwood, though I fear that what Father awakened in our blood can never truly be put to rest. If there is a God, may He forgive what we have done in these mountains. I know I shall never forgive myself." The person who found this letter tried to get in touch with the police in 1968, but they were told that the case was closed because too much time had passed and there was no evidence that could lead to prosecution. The letter's current location is unknown because the collector died in 1969 and the collection was split up. Dr. Montgomery, who had read and written down the letter, would not say anything else about it. He only said, "Some historical materials are best left unexamined." One strange thing about the Blackwood brothers' legacy is that the southeastern part of what is now Daniel Boone National Forest has one of the lowest rates of hunter visits in the whole Appalachian region. Even though there are a lot of animals and beautiful views, not many people go there. A 1,978 Forest Service visitor study found that both hunters and hikers tend to stay away from the area that used to be the Blackwood property, even if they don't know its history. Local guides wouldn't take groups to the area because they said it was dangerous terrain or protected wildlife habitats. Jeremiah Holbrook, a hunting guide who was interviewed for the analysis, said simply, "There are places in these mountains that don't welcome human presence. That's one of them. Animals know it too. You won't find deer or turkey in that hollow, no matter how good the foraging might be." Park rangers who were interviewed for the same assessment said that there was an unofficial policy against camping or hunting in that area. "We don't put it in the official guidelines," one ranger said, "but new staff are quietly told to send visitors somewhere else. We've had too many problems over the years. Equipment failures, injuries that can't be explained, hikers getting lost, even with a compass and map." Another ranger, who asked to remain anonymous, said, "There's something not right about that hollow. Animals stay away from it. Plants grow wrong there, twisted somehow, even though the soil and sunlight are the same as in the surrounding areas. We just tell people the area is being rehabilitated." When asked for more information about these strange things, rangers usually gave vague answers or changed the subject. There are no official forest maps made after 1970 that show the coordinates that would have marked the Blackwood cabin. In fact, topographical surveys seem to completely miss the area, leaving a small but noticeable blank space in the otherwise very well-documented national forest. This missing map was officially blamed on a surveying mistake that was never fixed, but some former Forest Service workers have said it was done on purpose. The fate of those who have tried to look into the Blackwood case over the years may be the most telling thing. After looking at the journals, Dr. Montgomery gave up her promising academic career and took a job teaching at a community college in Oregon. There, she reportedly refused to talk about her past research. In 1978, journalist Thomas Carter asked for information under the Freedom of Information Act. He wrote one article about the Blackwood case for a small regional magazine and then stopped writing about it altogether. In the early 1980 seconds, when other researchers tried to talk to him about it, he refused, saying only that some stories carry consequences for those who tell them. Martin Ridley, who interviewed Abigail Jenkins, died suddenly of a heart attack, just weeks after giving his recordings to the Library of Congress, even though he had never had heart problems before. Dr. Chet Richardson, who looked at the bone fragments found at the site, asked to be moved to a university in California shortly after sending in his report. He never wrote about forensic anthropology again. The story of the Blackwood brothers has become a footnote in the region's rich folklore over the years. People in the area might tell watered-down versions of the story around campfires, usually saying it was about two strange hermits who may have attacked people who came too close instead of eating them. The more disturbing parts have mostly been cut out of the oral tradition, maybe because everyone wants to forget. There are rumors that hikers have found strange stone formations or metal tools in the unmapped part of the forest, but no official investigations have been done. A backpacker said in 1992 that they found what looked like a stone-lined pit, which is similar to what the Forest Service report said in 1967. But when rangers went to the coordinates he gave them, they didn't find anything like that. The backpacker later changed his story, saying that he must have gotten lost in the thick forest. The last official mention of the case in government records is a 1973 memo from the Kentucky State Police Archives that says all files related to the 1,907 disappearances should be put in deep storage and preserved, but not digitized or included in any public-facing catalog. The memo also says, annual verification of secure containment required, which is strange because it doesn't say why files from a case that is more than 60 years old need to be checked for security every year. In 2002, someone filed a Freedom of Information Act request to get these materials, but it was denied because the case was still under investigation, even though it had been officially closed decades earlier. State officials said the designation was a mistake on their part when asked for more information, but they still wouldn't let anyone see the files. Even today, hunting licenses issued in Harlan County come with a map that shows an area shaded in gray and labeled Environmentally Sensitive Zone. No hunting permitted. This zone is exactly where the old Blackwood property used to be, but license holders are not given an official reason for the restriction. It is not possible to link the designation to any specific order for protecting the environment or program for protecting wildlife. People who live there know better than to ask. They just nod and stay away, especially in the fall when predators are most hungry. For more than 100 years, the mountain has kept its secrets. Maybe that's for the best. In 1968, a reporter from the Louisville Courier-Journal went to the area to talk to older people who might have remembered what happened in 1907. Most people didn't want to talk on record, but one man, who was in his 92nds at the time, gave a point of view that might best show how the Blackwood brothers still affect people. He told the reporter, "The mountains remember what people try to forget. Those brothers weren't the first to develop unusual appetites in these hills, and I doubt they'll be the last. Some hungers," he said, "don't die with the men who felt them. They sink into the soil, seep into the water, and wait for someone new to feed them." The journalist's article was never published. His notes were found in his car, which he had left near the edge of the forest. The journalist was reported missing, but he was later found in a Nashville hospital where he had checked himself in under a fake name. He couldn't remember anything about the 3 days after his interview and quit journalism soon after. When researchers got in touch with him in 1969, he wouldn't talk about the Blackwood case. He only said, "Some stories aren't meant to be told. Some appetites shouldn't be remembered." Perhaps he was right. Or maybe we let those appetites grow hungry again by forgetting them. There is no doubt that something happened in those Kentucky woods in the fall of 1907 that turned 7 missing persons cases into a legacy of whispered warnings and averted gazes. The official records may be sealed, the witnesses may be dead, and time may have destroyed the physical evidence. But the hole where the Blackwood cabin used to be is still empty of both animals and people. That silence says a lot in a forest full of life. Since this investigation was put together, there have been unexplained forest fires on the eastern ridge of Pine Mountain, even though there have been no reports of lightning strikes or campfires nearby. Rangers say that these fires usually happen in late September or October. They burn very hot but never spread beyond the borders of what used to be Blackwood land. Rangers say that after each fire, they find strange arrangements of stones that weren't there before the fire. For example, they find circular patterns that look like cooking pits that have just been used, even though the area is officially off limits to visitors. Maybe the wind and rain are just moving things around after the fires go through. Or maybe, as local legends say, some appetites never die, and they come back to life every fall when the hunting season starts and strangers come back to the old woods of Harlan County, Kentucky.